The white wall of snow hit harder than a fist to the jaw, and Katherine Summers knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die in her wedding dress. The carriage had overturned somewhere back on the trail, the horses having bolted in terror when the storm descended like God's own fury upon the Colorado territory. Katherine had crawled from the wreckage, her elaborate ivory gown already soaked through, the delicate lace her mother had spent months selecting now torn and mudded. Her fiancé, Richard Pemberton, had been thrown clear during the accident. She had screamed his name into the wind until her throat went raw, but received no answer except the howling blizzard that threatened to bury her alive. It was April of 1878, and spring storms in the Rockies were notoriously treacherous, but Richard had insisted they could make it from Westcliff to his family's ranch before the weather turned. He had been wrong. Katherine stumbled forward, her kid leather boots providing no traction in the deepening drifts. The temperature had plummeted so quickly that her wet dress was beginning to stiffen with ice. Her fingers had gone numb inside her satin gloves, and she could no longer feel her feet. The veil that had been pinned so carefully to her dark hair now hung in frozen strips across her face. She had no idea which direction she was walking. The world had become an endless expanse of white, sky and ground indistinguishable from each other. Her lungs burned with each gasping breath of frigid air. This was not how she had imagined this day would end. This morning, she had stood in the church in Westcliff, her heart filled with dutiful acceptance if not passionate love, prepared to marry a man her father had chosen for her. Richard Pemberton was wealthy, respectable, and had all his teeth, which her father had assured her was more than most women could hope for at her age of 22. Now she wondered if she would ever see another sunrise. The wind knocked her down, and Katherine found herself face first in snow so cold it felt like fire against her skin. She tried to push herself up, but her arms had no strength left. Perhaps it would be easier to simply stay here, to let the snow cover her like a blanket and slip into the sleep that promised to end this suffering. No. She forced herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet, swaying like a drunkard. Her father had not raised a quitter. Abraham Summers had brought his family west from Massachusetts 15 years ago with nothing but determination and grit. And he had built a successful freight business in Westcliff through sheer stubbornness. Katherine had inherited that same stubborn streak, and she would be damned if she froze to death before she had even properly lived. She took another step, then another. Through the white curtain of snow she thought she saw something dark, a shape, a structure. It might be a hallucination, her desperate mind conjuring salvation where none existed, but she staggered toward it anyway. The building materialized out of the storm like a miracle. It was small, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, a simple cabin with a lean-to stable attached. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, the gray plume whipped nearly horizontal by the wind. A light glowed in the single window. Katherine fell against the door and pounded with fists she could no longer feel. "Help!" she tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Please help me." The door opened so suddenly she nearly collapsed across the threshold. Strong hands caught her, and she found herself looking up into a face weathered by sun and wind, with startling blue eyes that widened in shock at the sight of her. "Christ Almighty," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in wool and leather, his dark hair slightly too long and curling at his collar. "Get inside before you freeze solid." He half carried her into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. The warmth hit Katherine like a physical force, and she began shaking so violently her teeth chattered. The man guided her to a chair near the pot-bellied stove in the corner, and immediately began wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What in God's name are you doing out there dressed like that?" He crouched in front of her, his hands rubbing her arms through the blanket, trying to restore circulation. "Are you alone? Is there anyone else out there?" Katherine tried to speak, but all that came out was a strange sobbing sound. Now that she was safe, the terror of the last hour crashed over her, and she could not seem to catch her breath. "Easy now," the man said, his voice gentling. "You are safe. Just breathe, slow and steady." He disappeared for a moment and returned with a tin cup of something hot. He pressed it into her trembling hands, steadying it when she nearly dropped it. "Drink this. Slow sips." The liquid was coffee, strong and bitter, but it was the most wonderful thing Katherine had ever tasted. The heat spread through her chest, and gradually her breathing began to even out. "My name is Thomas York," the man said, still crouched before her. "This is my winter line cabin. You are about 5 miles north of Westcliff. Can you tell me your name, Katherine?" she managed through chattering teeth. "Katherine Summers." Recognition flickered across his face. "Abraham Summers' daughter. I know your father. We have done business together. But what are you doing out in a storm dressed like a bride?" "Because I am a bride," Katherine said, and then, to her horror, she began to cry in earnest. "I was on my way to Richard Pemberton's ranch. The carriage overturned. Richard was thrown. I could not find him. I walked and walked, and then I found your cabin." Thomas York's expression darkened. "Richard Pemberton was with you? Is he still out there?" "I do not know. I called for him, but the wind was so loud I could not find him." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "He might be dead. He might be dying right now while I sit here warm and safe." Thomas stood abruptly and moved to the window, peering out at the white wall of snow. No one could survive out there for long in this. "If your carriage overturned on the main road, that is at least 2 miles south. In this storm, I would be lost before I made it 100 yards from the cabin." "But we cannot just leave him," Katherine protested, trying to stand. Her legs gave out immediately, and Thomas was there in an instant, catching her. "You cannot even stand," he said firmly, lowering her back into the chair. "And I am not sacrificing both our lives on a fool's errand. When the storm breaks, I will ride out and search for him. But right now, we need to get you properly warmed up before you lose any fingers or toes to frostbite." He knelt again and began unlacing her ruined boots. Katherine was too exhausted to protest the impropriety of a strange man removing her footwear. When he peeled away her stockings, she saw that her feet were alarmingly white with patches of gray. Thomas hissed through his teeth. "This is not good. I need to warm these up gradually. It is going to hurt like hell." He was not wrong. As he wrapped her feet in warm towels and held them between his hands, the returning sensation was agony. Katherine bit her lip to keep from crying out, but small whimpers escaped despite her best efforts. "I know," Thomas murmured, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. "I am sorry, but it has to be done." Gradually, the worst of the pain faded to a dull ache, and color began returning to her feet. Thomas examined them carefully, pressing on each toe. "I think you will keep all of them, which is more than I hoped when I first saw them." "You are a lucky woman, Miss Summers." "I do not feel particularly lucky," Katherine said, exhaustion weighing down her words. "I am supposed to be married right now. Instead, my fiancé is missing, possibly dead, and I am alone with a strange man in a cabin in the middle of nowhere." "I am not that strange," Thomas said, and there was the faintest hint of humor in his voice. "And you could have done worse for rescuers. I have all my teeth, most of my wits, and I make decent coffee." Despite everything, Katherine felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Your humility is overwhelming. One of my better qualities." He stood and moved to a rough wooden table where a pot sat on a small cook stove. I have stew. It is nothing fancy, just rabbit and vegetables, but it is hot and filling. When did you last eat? Katherine tried to remember. The wedding breakfast felt like a lifetime ago. This morning, I think. I was too nervous to eat much. Nervous about marrying Richard Pemberton. Cannot say I blame you. Thomas ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a spoon. You know Richard? Katherine asked, accepting the bowl. The aroma made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. I know of him. His family has the biggest spread in the county. He runs it now that his father passed. Thomas leaned against the table, arms crossed. He is known for being shrewd in business. Some might say ruthless. He has bought out a lot of the smaller ranchers around here. Katherine ate a spoonful of the stew, which was surprisingly good. My father says Richard is ambitious. He says that is a good quality in a husband. And what do you say? It was a strange question. No one had ever asked Katherine what she thought about her own marriage. I say that I am 22 years old and unmarried, which makes me something of an old maid. My father wants to see me settled before he is gone. Richard offered a good match. That is all that matters, is it not? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I suppose that depends on what you think matters. Before Katherine could ask what he meant, a tremendous gust of wind shook the cabin, and snow rattled against the window like thrown gravel. Thomas moved to check the door, making sure it was secure, then added another log to the stove. This is going to be a long night, he said. That storm sounds like it is getting worse, not better. I hope you do not mind close quarters, Miss Summers, because we are going to be stuck here together for a while. Katherine looked around the small cabin properly for the first time. It was a single room, perhaps 15 feet square, with the stove in one corner and a narrow bed in the other. There was the table, 2 chairs, and some shelves holding supplies. A rifle hung on the wall along with various pieces of tack and rope. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and leather. It was simple and sparse, but clean and well-maintained. Where will you sleep? She asked. Thomas gestured to the floor near the stove. I have blankets. I have slept in worse places. You take the bed. I cannot take your bed. This is your cabin. And you are half frozen and in shock. You need rest. I insist. His tone made it clear there would be no argument. Katherine was too tired to fight. Now that the immediate danger had passed and she had food in her stomach, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She could barely keep her eyes open. Thomas seemed to notice. Your dress is still wet. That needs to come off or you will catch your death. Katherine felt her face heat despite the chill that still lingered in her bones. I cannot undress in front of you. That would be entirely inappropriate. More inappropriate than dying of pneumonia. Thomas turned his back, facing the wall. I will not look. I have some spare clothes you can wear. They will be too big, but they will be dry and warm. He pulled a bundle from a trunk near the bed and set it on the mattress, still keeping his back turned. Katherine stared at his broad shoulders, at the way his homespun shirt stretched across them. This was absurd. This entire situation was impossible. Just this morning she had been standing in her family's parlor while her mother adjusted her veil, and now she was about to undress in front of a stranger. But he was right. The wet dress was dangerous. She could already feel congestion building in her chest. With trembling fingers, Katherine began unhooking the endless row of tiny buttons down the back of her gown. It was nearly impossible to reach them all, and several times she had to stop and rest, her arms aching from the awkward angle. You need help? Thomas asked, still facing away. No, Katherine said quickly, then sighed. Yes, I cannot reach the top buttons. Thomas turned, keeping his eyes carefully on her face. He moved behind her and Katherine felt his fingers, surprisingly deft, working the buttons free. His touch was impersonal, efficient, but Katherine felt her skin prickle with awareness everywhere his knuckles brushed her spine. "There," he said after a moment, stepping back quickly. "I will be outside checking on my horse. That will give you privacy." "In the storm," Katherine protested. "The stable is attached. I will be fine." He grabbed his coat and disappeared through a door Katherine had not noticed before, leaving her alone. She quickly stripped off the ruined wedding dress, the layers of petticoats, the corset that had been cinched so tight she could barely breathe. She pulled on the clothes Thomas had left, a worn flannel shirt that hung to her knees and wool trousers that she had to roll up repeatedly and tie with a piece of rope to keep from falling down. There were thick socks as well, which she pulled on gratefully. When Thomas returned a few minutes later, snow dusting his shoulders, he took in her appearance and nodded approvingly. "Much better. How do you feel?" "Warmer, exhausted, worried." Katherine sank onto the bed, which was just a straw mattress on a wooden frame but felt like heaven. "What if Richard is dead? What if this is all my fault because I suggested we should leave before the storm hit?" "Did you suggest that?" Katherine shook her head. "No, Richard insisted. He said we could outrun it." "Then it is not your fault. A man makes his own choices." Thomas moved to bank the fire in the stove. "You should try to sleep. There is nothing more we can do tonight." "I do not think I can sleep," Katherine said, but even as the words left her mouth, her eyes were closing. She was dimly aware of Thomas draping another blanket over her, of the warmth of the cabin wrapping around her like an embrace. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the howling of the wind and Thomas York's quiet voice saying, "You are safe now. I promise." When Katherine woke, weak sunlight was filtering through the window and the wind had stopped. For a disoriented moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the terror, the miraculous appearance of the cabin. She sat up and saw Thomas at the table cleaning his rifle. He looked up when she stirred and something in his expression softened. "Good morning. How do you feel?" "Sore, confused, real." Katherine pushed her tangled hair back from her face. "I half thought I dreamed all of this." "I wish you had." Thomas set the rifle aside. "But we need to talk about what happens next. The storm has passed and I need to ride out and search for Richard Pemberton." Katherine's stomach knotted with dread. "Yes, of course, I will come with you." "No, you will stay here where it is warm. You are not strong enough yet for a ride like that, and I can cover more ground alone." He stood and moved to the stove, pouring coffee. "If I find him alive, I will bring him back here. If I find him dead, I will take him to Westcliff and send someone back for you. Either way, I should return before nightfall. And if you do not find him at all," Thomas handed her the coffee, "let us cross that bridge if we come to it." He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jack, and rode out within the hour, leaving Katherine alone in the cabin. She used the time to tidy up, to wash as best she could with the water Thomas had left warming on the stove. She examined her ruined wedding dress, lying in a sodden heap on the floor, and felt oddly detached from it. It seemed like a costume from a play she had been acting in, not something that belonged to her real life. What was her real life now? If Richard was dead, she was free. The thought came unbidden and brought with it a surge of guilt so intense she felt sick. What kind of woman felt relief at the thought of her fiancé's death? But she had not loved Richard. She had barely known him. Their courtship had consisted of 3 supervised meetings and a handful of formal dinners. He had been polite and proper, and she had agreed to marry him because it was what was expected, what her father wanted, what made sense. Katherine had never really questioned whether there might be something more to hope for. Her mother had told her that love came after marriage, that a woman's duty was to be a good wife and mother, and that passion was something found in novels, not real life. Katherine had accepted this, had resigned herself to a future of companionable partnership at best, cold indifference at worst. But then Thomas York had opened his door and pulled her from the storm, and something in her chest had cracked open. The way he had cared for her, gentle but efficient. The way he had looked at her, really looked, as though she were a person with thoughts and feelings that mattered. The way he had asked what she thought, what she wanted. No one had ever asked her that before. Katherine spent the day trying not to think about any of it. She ate some of the stew Thomas had left warming. She attempted to mend the worst of the tears in her dress, though she suspected it was beyond saving. She read from the single book on Thomas's shelf, a battered copy of 2 years before the mast, and tried not to watch the window constantly for signs of his return. It was late afternoon when she finally heard hoofbeats. Katherine rushed to the door and threw it open, her heart in her throat. Thomas was alone. He was leading a second horse, a gray mare that Katherine recognized as one of the pair that had been pulling the wedding carriage. Strapped to the mare's back was a shape wrapped in a blanket. Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "Is he dead?" Thomas's face was grim as he dismounted. "Exposure, most likely. I found him about a mile from where your carriage went over. He must have been thrown clear and hit his head. He probably never regained consciousness, which is a mercy." He began untying the body. "I am sorry, Miss Summers." Katherine stood in the doorway trying to feel something, grief, loss, anything. But all she felt was a strange numbness followed by that same guilty sense of relief. "I should have loved him," she whispered. "I am a terrible person because I feel almost nothing at his death." Thomas looked up at her and his expression was understanding, not judgmental. "You did not choose him. He was chosen for you. You cannot force your heart to feel what it does not." "I should cry. I should be devastated." Should is a dangerous word. It makes people feel guilty for being human. Thomas secured the horse to a post. "I will take him to Westcliff at first light. You will come with me. Your family will be worried sick." "They think I am married and safe at the Pemberton Ranch," Katherine said. "They will not expect to hear from me for days. Still, word needs to get out about what happened. There will be arrangements to make, his family to notify." Thomas climbed the steps to the cabin, and Katherine stepped back to let him in. "And you need to get home." Home. The word felt strange. Her father's house in Westcliff had never quite felt like home, not since her mother had died of scarlet fever 3 years ago. It was just a place she lived, going through the motions of keeping house for her father, waiting for him to arrange her future. "Yes," Katherine said quietly. "I suppose I do." They ate a subdued dinner that evening, the body outside wrapped and tied to a tree to keep it safe from predators. Katherine picked at her food, her appetite gone. "Tell me about yourself," she said suddenly, needing to break the oppressive silence. "You said you know my father. Are you a rancher?" Thomas shook his head. "I run cattle, but I do not own land. I am a cowhand mostly. I work for different outfits depending on the season. This cabin belongs to the Circle T Ranch. I winter here, watching over their north range. Come spring, I will move on to wherever the work takes me." "So you have no real home?" "I have never needed one. I grew up on the move. My father was a trapper, dragging my mother and me all over the Rockies. When they both died of cholera when I was 16, I just kept moving. It is all I know." He met her eyes across the table. "I am not a man of property or prospects, Miss Summers. I own what I can carry and I go where the wind takes me." "That sounds lonely." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but it is free. I answer to no one but myself. I wake up each morning and decide where I want to go, what I want to do. There is value in that." Katherine thought about her own life, every day dictated by duty and expectation. "I cannot imagine that kind of freedom." "Can you not? What would you do if you could do anything you wanted?" The question caught her off guard. I do not know. I have never really thought about it. Think about it now. Katherine set down her fork and stared at the rough wooden table. What did she want? Not what her father wanted, not what society expected, but what she truly desired. I always wanted to paint, she said slowly. When I was a girl, my mother hired a drawing master for my sisters and me. I loved it. The colors, the way you could capture a moment or a feeling on paper. But my father said it was frivolous, not a skill that would help me be a good wife, so I stopped. Why? Because it was impractical. Foolish. Or because someone told you it was and you believed them. Thomas leaned back in his chair. What if you had kept painting? What if you had filled 100 canvases with whatever you wanted? Would that have hurt anyone? No, but it would not have helped anyone either. It would have helped you. Is that not worth something? Katherine had no answer for that. She had been raised to believe that her own wants were selfish, that a woman's purpose was to serve others. But looking at Thomas York, at this man who had chosen a life of freedom over security, she wondered if perhaps there was another way to live. They talked late into the night, and Katherine found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. About her mother's death and how lost she had felt. About her father's increasing distance, his obsessive focus on business. About her 2 younger sisters who had both married and moved away, leaving her alone in a house that echoed with silence. Thomas listened, really listened, asking questions that showed he cared about the answers. He told her about his own life, about the places he had been and the things he had seen. He spoke of mountains and rivers, of vast prairies and skies so big they made you feel like the smallest, most insignificant thing in the world, and somehow the most important thing all at once. I would like to see that, Katherine said wistfully. I have lived in Westcliff since I was 7 years old. I have never been more than 50 miles from it. You could see it. The world is out there waiting. Not for women like me. I do not have your freedom. Freedom is not something you have, Miss Summers. It is something you take. The words hung in the air between them, full of dangerous possibility. Katherine felt something shift inside her, like the first crack in river ice at the start of spring. They rode out at dawn, Katherine riding the gray mare while Thomas led the bay with Richard's body. The journey to Westcliff took 4 hours through snow that in places drifted higher than the horses' bellies. Katherine was exhausted by the time they reached the edge of town, her legs aching from gripping the saddle, her face raw from the wind. Word of their arrival spread quickly. Katherine's father met them in front of the general store, his face a mask of shock and confusion. Katherine, thank God you are alive. When the storm hit, we feared the worst. But where is Richard? Why are you dressed like that? Thomas dismounted and explained what had happened, his voice steady and respectful. Katherine watched her father's expression shift from relief to horror to something harder to read. When Thomas finished, Abraham Summers was quiet for a long moment. So Richard is dead, and you spent the night alone with my daughter in a cabin. His voice was flat, dangerous. I saved your daughter's life, Thomas said evenly, and I treated her with nothing but respect. That may be, but it does not change the facts. Katherine was to be married yesterday. Instead, she is compromised beyond repair. Abraham looked at his daughter, and Katherine saw disappointment in his eyes. No man will want her now, not after this. Father, nothing happened, Katherine protested. Thomas was a perfect gentleman. It does not matter what happened. It matters what people will believe happened. Your reputation is destroyed. Abraham turned to Thomas. You will marry her. Katherine felt as though the ground had dropped out from under her. What? No, Father, you cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. This man has ruined you, whether intentionally or not. He will make it right. Thomas's jaw tightened. With all due respect, Mr. Summers, I did not ruin your daughter. I saved her, and I will not be forced into marriage because of small-minded gossip. Then you will be forced into it by law. I will have you arrested for compromising a woman's virtue." "That is ridiculous," Katherine said, anger flooding through her. "He did nothing wrong. Nevertheless, that is how it is." Abraham's voice softened slightly. "I am sorry, Katherine, but this is the way it has to be. You need a husband, and Mr. York has put himself in the position of needing to provide that. You will marry, and quickly, before the scandal spreads further." Katherine felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. "This is insane. We barely know each other. You knew Richard Pemberton even less, and you were prepared to marry him." Abraham gestured to the crowd that had gathered to gawk at them. "Look around you, daughter. Everyone in this town knows you spent the night alone with this man. Your name is already being whispered. The only way to salvage this is marriage." Katherine looked at Thomas, who stood rigid with barely controlled anger. Their eyes met, and she saw her own helpless fury reflected there. This was not how it was supposed to happen. He had saved her life, had been kind and decent, and now he was being trapped because of it. "I will not let you be arrested," Katherine said quietly. "If we must marry, then we will marry." "Katherine," Thomas said, his voice low, "you do not have to do this." "Neither do you, but my father will make trouble for you if we refuse. At least this way you are free and clear." She managed a weak smile. "Besides, you said you had all your teeth. That is more than I can hope for at my age, apparently." Despite everything, Thomas's lips twitched. "I did say that, did not I?" "You did." Abraham looked between them, his expression calculating. "Then it is settled. The wedding will take place tomorrow. I will speak to Reverend Harris and make the arrangements. Thomas York, you will provide for my daughter in the manner to which she is accustomed." "I am a cowhand, Mr. Summers. I have about $30 to my name and no property. I cannot provide her with anything resembling what she is accustomed to." "Then you will work for me." "I can always use another man in the freight business. It pays well enough to support a wife." Abraham was already turning away, dismissing them. "Katherine, come home and get cleaned up. You look like a vagrant." Thomas caught Katherine's arm as she moved to follow her father. "Are you certain about this? We can refuse. I will deal with whatever consequences come." Katherine looked at him, at this man who had risked his life to search for Richard in the storm, who had asked her what she wanted, who represented a freedom she had never imagined. An idea was forming in her mind, reckless and impossible. "I am certain," she said. "But Thomas, if we do this, I have one condition." "What is that?" "That we make this a real marriage. Not just for show, not just to satisfy my father and the gossips. If I am going to be your wife, I want to actually be your wife." Thomas searched her face, his blue eyes intense. "You do not know me, Katherine. I am not a man who stays in one place. I have nothing to offer you but an uncertain future." "Richard offered me a certain future, and I would have been miserable. You offered me conversation and coffee and the suggestion that I might paint if I wanted to. That is worth more than all of Richard Pemberton's land." She took his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength. "I am not asking for promises of forever. I am asking for honesty, for respect, for the chance to choose my own life for once." Thomas looked at their joined hands for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "All right, Katherine Summers. If we are going to do this, we will do it honestly. I will be your husband in every way that matters. And I promise you this, you will never be trapped with me. If you want to leave, if you want your freedom, you will have it. I will not be a cage." "I know," Katherine said, and realized with a start that she meant it. This man, virtually a stranger, had shown her more consideration in 2 days than her father had in years. "I trust you." The words felt momentous, heavy with meaning. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Then let us get through tomorrow and we will figure out the rest as it comes." Katherine went home with her father, endured his lecture about propriety and duty, and spent a restless night in her childhood bed. She thought about running, about saddling a horse and riding off into the mountains. But where would she go? She had no money, no skills beyond keeping house and a little rusty painting. And despite the insanity of the situation, she did not actually want to run. Not anymore. She wanted to see what happened if she stayed. The wedding took place the next afternoon in the same church where she had stood 2 days earlier preparing to marry Richard. This time there was no elaborate dress, no carefully arranged veil. Katherine wore a simple blue calico dress, and Thomas wore the same clothes he had worn to save her life. Dark trousers, a worn leather vest, a white shirt that had seen better days. There were no guests except her father and 2 people pulled off the street to serve as witnesses. Reverend Harris rushed through the ceremony with obvious disapproval, clearly aware of the scandalous circumstances. When he pronounced them man and wife, Thomas kissed Katherine on the cheek, chaste and respectful. And just like that, Katherine Summers became Catherine York. Her father gave them a small house on the edge of town as a wedding gift, along with a job for Thomas managing one of his freight wagons. It was clear Abraham was trying to control the situation, to keep his daughter close and respectable. But Katherine saw it for what it was, a chance. Thomas moved his few belongings into the house that evening. Katherine made dinner, simple fare of fried potatoes and bacon, and they ate in awkward silence. It felt strange to be alone with him now that they were married, all the easy conversation of that first night seeming impossible to recapture. "I can sleep in the other room," Thomas said after they had cleaned up. The house had 2 small bedrooms which had probably been intended for children. "I do not want you to feel uncomfortable." Katherine gathered her courage. "Thomas, I meant what I said. I want this to be a real marriage. Not immediately, not until we are ready, but eventually. I do not want us to be strangers living under the same roof." Thomas leaned against the table, studying her. "Why? You could have insisted on a marriage in name only. You could have protected yourself." "I am tired of protecting myself. I am tired of being careful and proper and doing what everyone expects." Katherine moved closer to him, her heart pounding. "You asked me what I would do if I could do anything. Well, I am choosing this. I am choosing you. You barely know me. Then let us get to know each other." She reached out and took his hand, marveling at her own boldness. "We have time." Thomas threaded his fingers through hers, his touch warm and solid. "I am not good at staying, Katherine. I have spent my entire life moving. I do not know how to be what you need. I need someone who sees me as a person, not a problem to be solved or a possession to be managed." "You already do that." She looked up at him, at this complicated man who had been forced into her life by chance and circumstance. "Teach me to be free. That is all I ask." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, the wariness giving way to something warmer. "That I think I can do." He pulled her gently into his arms and Katherine went, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, and it felt more intimate than any kiss. That night, they slept in the same bed, though they did nothing more than hold hands in the darkness. It was enough. It was a beginning. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Thomas worked for Katherine's father during the day, driving freight wagons to the mining camps in the mountains. Katherine kept house, and in the afternoon, when her work was done, she took out the old paints and brushes she had packed away years ago and began to paint again. At first, her hands were clumsy, unsure. But gradually, the skill came back. She painted the mountains she could see from her window, the way the light hit the snow at sunset, turning it pink and gold. She painted Thomas's horse, Jack, standing patient in the small corral behind the house. She painted from memory the storm that had changed her life, trying to capture the terrifying beauty of it. Thomas would come home in the evenings, tired and dusty, and he would stand behind her and watch her work. He never criticized, never told her she was wasting her time. Instead, he would say things like, "That color there, that is exactly right," or "I can feel the cold coming off that canvas." His words meant more to Katherine than any praise she had ever received. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about his childhood, about following his father through the wilderness, learning to read the weather and track game. Katherine told him about growing up in Massachusetts, about the shock of moving west, about how her mother had tried so hard to maintain a veneer of Eastern sophistication in a rough Colorado mining town. "She would have hated this," Katherine said one evening, gesturing at the simple house, her paint-stained apron. "She wanted me to marry well, to have servants and fine dresses." "And you wanted to paint," Thomas said. "I wanted to matter. I wanted to be more than someone's decorative daughter or dutiful wife." Katherine set down her brush and turned to face him. "Do you think that is selfish? I think it is human." Thomas crossed the room and took her hands, paint and all. "You do matter, Katherine. You matter to me." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Katherine felt her breath catch. They had been married for 3 weeks, living together, learning each other, but they had not moved beyond chaste kisses and holding hands. It had felt like they were both waiting for something, some signal that the time was right. "Thomas," Katherine whispered, "I think I am falling in love with you." He went very still. "You do not have to say that. I am not saying it because I have to. I am saying it because it is true." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. "I did not expect this. I thought we would be partners, friends maybe, but it is more than that. You make me feel alive." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as though her words pained him. When he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been fighting it because I did not want to trap you, did not want you to feel obligated. But Katherine, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "Then stop fighting it. Love me. Let me love you." Thomas kissed her then, really kissed her, and it was nothing like the perfunctory brush of lips at their wedding. This was heat and want and tenderness all tangled together. Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the last 3 weeks. He picked her up, and she laughed against his mouth as he carried her to the bedroom. They fumbled with buttons and laces, learning each other with hands and lips and whispered words. It was awkward and sweet and absolutely perfect. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Katherine felt more complete than she ever had in her life. Thomas stroked her hair, his touch gentle. "I never thought I would have this," he murmured. "I thought I would be alone forever, just me and the open road." "Do you regret being trapped?" Katherine asked. "I am not trapped. This is a choice. Every day with you is a choice, and it is the easiest choice I have ever made." He kissed her forehead. "You have ruined me for wandering, Katherine York. Where you are is where I want to be." Katherine smiled and pressed closer to him. "Good, because you are stuck with me now." Spring turned to summer, and their love deepened. Thomas proved to be a hard worker, and Abraham grudgingly admitted that he was good at the freight business. Katherine painted and kept house and slowly, carefully, began to build friendships with the other women in town. The scandal of her marriage faded, replaced by newer gossip. One day in late July, Katherine realized her monthly courses had not come. A week later, she knew for certain. She was pregnant. She told Thomas that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, then broke into a grin so wide it transformed his usually serious face. "A baby, you are certain as I can be without seeing the doctor. Are you happy?" Thomas picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "Happy, Catherine, I am terrified and thrilled and absolutely over the moon. We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine was sick for the first few months, unable to keep much down. Thomas was endlessly patient, bringing her soda crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her back when she was ill. As her belly swelled, he marveled at it, talking to the baby through her skin. "I hope they have your stubbornness," he said one night, his hand warm on her stomach. "And your talent. Maybe they will be an artist." "And I hope they have your kindness," Catherine replied, "and your way of seeing what matters." Their son was born in March of 1879, a year after the storm that had brought them together. They named him Jonathan Abraham York, Jonathan for Thomas's father and Abraham for Catherine's. He was healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Thomas held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." Catherine, exhausted but elated, watched her husband cradle their baby and felt her heart expand. This was what mattered, not wealth or status or doing what was expected. This love, this family they had built from the wreckage of her first wedding, this was everything. Abraham Summers was a surprisingly doting grandfather. He visited often, bringing gifts and bouncing his grandson on his knee. One day, when Jonathan was 6 months old, he pulled Thomas aside. "I misjudged you," Abraham said gruffly. "I thought you were a drifter, someone unreliable, but you have made my daughter happy and you are a good father. I am glad she married you." Thomas shook the older man's hand. "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." "I want to make you a partner in the business," Abraham continued. "You have earned it. What do you say?" Thomas glanced at Catherine, who was painting at her easel with Jonathan sleeping in a basket at her feet. "I would be honored, but I need to talk to my wife first." That evening, after Jonathan was in bed, Thomas told Catherine about her father's offer. "It would mean real security for us, for Jonathan. But it would also mean staying here, putting down roots. I know that was never part of the plan." Catherine set aside the baby blanket she had been mending and took his hands. "Thomas, we have roots. They are right here in this house in each other. I do not need you to wander to prove you are free. You are free because you choose to be here with me." "I do choose it," Thomas said firmly. "Every single day I choose you." "Then accept my father's offer. Let us build something here." And so they did. Thomas became a partner in Summers Freight and the business flourished under his management. Catherine continued to paint, and her work began to attract attention. A gallery owner passing through Westcliff saw her paintings and offered to sell them in Denver. To her amazement, they sold quickly, and suddenly, Catherine had income of her own. When Jonathan was 2 years old, Catherine became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter with Catherine's dark hair and Thomas's stubborn chin. They named her Elizabeth Ruth, Ruth for Thomas's mother. Their family grew, their love deepened, and the years passed in a blur of work and laughter and the thousand small joys of a life well lived. Catherine's paintings hung in galleries across Colorado, and she taught painting classes in their home to young women eager to learn. Thomas built the freight business into one of the most successful in the territory, but he never forgot to come home for dinner, never missed a chance to tell his wife he loved her. Jonathan grew tall and strong, passionate about horses and open spaces. Elizabeth proved to have her mother's artistic eye, always drawing and creating. When Jonathan was 8 and Elizabeth 6, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, Michael and Daniel, who filled the house with chaos and joy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Katherine back to the cabin where he had saved her life. They rode out on a clear April day, the mountains still capped with snow, and stood outside the rough-hewn structure. "I was terrified that night," Thomas admitted. "When I opened the door and saw you standing there in that ruined wedding dress, half frozen, I thought my heart would stop. You looked like something out of a fairy tale, this beautiful, impossible woman appearing out of the storm." "I thought you were my miracle," Katherine said, leaning into his side. "And I was right." Thomas wrapped his arm around her. "I think we were each other's miracle. You taught me how to stay, how to build something that mattered. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every single morning." "And you taught me how to be free," Katherine replied. "You showed me that freedom is not about going wherever you want. It is about choosing what matters and holding onto it with both hands." They went inside the cabin, which was mostly as Thomas had left it a decade ago. The bed was still in the corner, the stove still stood ready. Katherine walked to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of mountains and sky. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The wandering life?" Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Not even a little. Every good thing I have came from the day I found you in that storm. I would not trade our life for anything." Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him, slow and deep. "I love you, Thomas York. Thank you for saving my life." "Thank you for letting me," Thomas murmured against her lips, "and for saving mine right back." They returned home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Their children rushed out to meet them, Jonathan helping his father with the horses, while Elizabeth dragged her mother inside to see the picture she had drawn. The twins, now 5 years old, tumbled around everyone's feet like puppies. Katherine stood in the doorway of their home, watching her family, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was not the life she had planned. This was not the safe, predictable future her father had arranged. This was so much better. That night, after the children were in bed, Katherine and Thomas sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Thomas held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how close I came to missing all of this. If the storm had not hit, if I had married Richard, if I had never found your cabin," Katherine shuddered, "I would have lived my whole life and never known what it felt like to be truly happy. But you did find my cabin, and we are here now together." Thomas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "That is all that matters." "You are right." Katherine smiled at him. "The storm was the best thing that ever happened to me." As the years continued to pass, the York family became a cornerstone of Westcliff. Thomas and Katherine's freight business expanded, employing dozens of men and providing a vital link to the mining camps in the mountains. Katherine's art school grew, teaching not just painting but also business skills to young women, helping them find their own paths to independence. Jonathan, when he came of age, chose to work in the family business, showing a natural aptitude for logistics and negotiation. Elizabeth pursued her art with a passion that reminded everyone of her mother, eventually moving to Denver to study formally and returning with plans to open her own gallery. The twins, Michael and Daniel, were inseparable and together started a ranch outside of town, breeding horses. Through it all, Thomas and Katherine remained devoted to each other. They had their arguments, of course, the inevitable friction of two strong-willed people building a life together. But they always talked through their problems, always remembered the promises they had made to each other in the aftermath of that storm. As they grew older, their love only deepened. Thomas's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines appeared around Katherine's eyes from years of smiling. They moved a bit slower, worked a bit less, but their connection remained as strong as ever. On a spring evening in 1908, 30 years after the storm that had changed their lives, Thomas and Katherine sat together on the porch of their home. They were grandparents now, with 7 grandchildren who filled their lives with noise and laughter. Thomas had retired from the freight business, turning it over to Jonathan. Katherine still painted, though her hands were not as steady as they once were. "Do you remember," Katherine said, "how terrified I was that day I stumbled to your cabin? I thought I was going to die." "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," Thomas replied, "even half frozen and scared out of your mind. I looked at you and something in my chest just knew." "Knew what?" "That you were going to change everything." Thomas took her hand, his grip still firm despite his 70 years. "And you did. You took a lonely cowhand who thought he would drift forever and gave him a home. You gave me everything, Katherine." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from too much happiness to contain. "We gave each other everything. That is how love works." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "If you could go back," Thomas asked, "knowing everything that would happen, would you still walk into that storm?" Katherine did not hesitate. "In a heartbeat, every single time." "Me too." Thomas raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done 1,000 times before. Every single time. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Thomas and Katherine York sat together on their porch, hands intertwined, hearts full. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but the love it had sparked burned as bright as ever, a beacon that would light their way until their very last days. And when those days came, many years later, Thomas and Katherine were still together, still holding hands, still choosing each other with every breath. They left behind not just children and grandchildren, but a legacy of love that had started with an impossible chance meeting during a blizzard and grown into something beautiful and enduring. The people of Westcliff would tell their story for generations. The bride who was saved by a cowboy in a storm, and how that cowboy became the truest husband she could have ever hoped for. It was a story of luck and choice, of circumstance and will, of 2 people who found each other in the wilderness and built a love strong enough to last a lifetime. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the storm that brought them together, but the life they chose to build afterward. Not the fear and chaos of that first night, but the 3 decades of joy and partnership that followed. Not the wedding that never was, but the real marriage they created day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Katherine had walked into a storm thinking her life was over, and instead found it was just beginning. Thomas had opened his door to a stranger and discovered his destiny. Together, they proved that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most beautiful futures, and that love, when it is real and freely chosen, can weather any storm life throws at it. Their story ended the way all the best love stories do, with 2 people who loved each other deeply, lived fully, and left the world better than they found it. And in the memories of their children, grandchildren, and the community they helped build, Thomas and Katherine York lived on, a testament to the power of love to transform, to heal, and to endure.